Greetings and salutations, brother. Welcome back into another One Piece chapter. This time we got chapter 1170 here in front of us, and we're just here to yap all about it. So, getting right into it, we got another reader request in the cover. Boy, I cannot wait until we get back to the canon ones, which should be around the corner. But today we do have Jinbei as a ticket attendant handing out passes to young Straw Hat pirates. Kind of odd that whoever requested this cover did not ask for Brook or Frankie. I thought that was kind of strange. It's like, wait, like they asked for Luffy, Usopp, Nami, Sanji, Zoro, Robin, Chopper, and Jinbei, but no Frankie or Brook. Is their agenda showing? I think so. So you guys know me. I do like to look kind of deep into these cover page requests just to see if we can extrapolate some kind of foreshadowing or just some kind of Easter egg. And I'm gonna be honest, guys, I don't really have all too much. The only thing that really stood out to me, at least, was the eel. The eel looks kind of cursed, kind of scary in the background, and it also has the number 10 on its head. And at least when it comes to the Straw Hat Pirates, when I see the number 10, I immediately think of the 10th Nakama, because people are still expecting one more person to join the crew. When we started the series, Luffy said, oh yes, I need a crew of about 10 good men. Right now, if you don't include Luffy, we only got 9. So everybody is anticipating one final member before we hit the end of story. Whether it's Yamato, Vivi, Bonnie, or Loki, it's up in the air. Personally, if I had to say one character off of this cover, I'd say Loki, just because it's an electric eel and Loki is lightning, but I think that's a little bit of a stretch. Either way, going on to the chapter now, we kick things off with Loki fighting Ragnir. Loki's confused. He's like, wait, who threw that hammer? It just makes sense to think that somebody else is in the room, because the last thing you'd expect is a flying, living hammer. It's like fighting a ghost, and I'm not gonna lie, if I was in Loki's position, I'd probably start tearing up. I don't like ghosts, brother. You know, flying objects, count me out. Loki ends up going into the treasure room. He sees the box that contains the devil fruit, but before he can eat it, the hammer strikes yet again. And Loki's like, dang, what is up with this hammer? And also, why is it so damn heavy? Because when Ragnir lands and touches the ground, it cracks the floor beneath it. What's up with this, right? Is Ragnir really that heavy? Or does this have to do with the devil fruit that's associated with it? We'll talk about that more here in a little bit. So, we now cut back to King Harald, and he talks about the legendary devil fruit, saying the reason why nobody has been able to eat it for all these years is because Ragnir has been such a great guard of it. And Harald said now that he has these God Knight buffs, he should be able to conquer it and take that devil fruit for himself, which is crazy hype, mind you. That upscaling is insane. Saying that Ragnir can only be beaten by God Knight Harald? Damn, dude, we're putting a lot of stocks into this hammer squirrel thing. So we see that Scopper and Shanks are wondering how to deal with King Harald. They're like, yo, we hit this guy over and over and over, but nothing's really working, even when they have their attacks coded in hockey. That is when Scopper says, okay, this is working, right? They will feel pain from our Conqueror hockey attacks. The goal, the way to get around the immortality and regeneration, is to simply keep pounding away until they don't want to get back up. All right, that is straight up a caveman answer. I remember when we first came to Elbaph and Chopper saw Scopper wound Saint Somers, and he was like, oh my gosh, Scopper did it. I must follow Scopper and find out how he did it. That's when Chopper ended up chasing Scopper to find out the answer for himself, only to realize that it was Conqueror's hockey, something that Chopper cannot do. And then Scopper's like, hey guys, these guys are not immortal. Your opponents can be beaten. Just be mindful of how you use your Conqueror's hockey. And I was like, oh shoot, is there another realm? Is there some sort of special coding we need to do to beat these guys down once and for all? And here in this chapter, Scopper simply says, nope, you just keep on beating them. It's pretty hilarious. I was expecting some other route. Maybe there is still another route to beat these opponents, but this is just what Scopper and the Pirates King crew figured out. When in doubt, just beat them down until they don't want to get back up. Which makes sense, right? Even if you regenerate infinitely, you still feel the pain. And because of that pain, eventually you won't want to get up. So Shanks is like, hey, Scopper, how do you know about this? How do you know about the God Knight powers and immortality? And Scopper drops the big reveal that Roger's crew has been fighting off the God Knights for quite some time because they kept on reappearing to pick up Shanks. Bro, don't say Garling's a bad dad. Hey. Garling tried, brother, but Pirate King Goldie Roger just kept on separating this man from his son, which is pretty crazy, mind you. Like, I wonder what was the thought process behind that for the Roger Pirates. They're like, okay, this isn't our kid. We kind of like this red-haired boy, though. And also, even though their dad is here, their dad doesn't seem like the best of guys. Like, I wish I could have seen that conversation, right? Like, oh, like, I think we could give him a better life as a pirate than a celestial dragon. So while Scopper is reminiscing on that scene, we see 4 brand new God Knight silhouettes. And these silhouettes, mind you, are pretty one-to-one with the silhouettes that Dragon gave us when he first talked about the God Knights. So I do not know who these people are. Could be new ones, could be people we saw at God Valley with different costumes. There's a lot of possibilities there. But yes, they're like, hey, there should be a red-haired baby in your possession. That's our captain's son. Can we have him back? And of course, the Roger Pirates didn't exactly comply. In fact, it sounds like they just straight up beat them every single time they showed up. Dude, the God Knights catching this crazy L in a chapter where they're not even really present? Insane. And it's not just one L. You know, like, they didn't just come after Shanks 1 or 2 times. No, it sounds like they kept on coming back to pick Shanks up. But Roger said, no, that's my son now. And it's funny because Shanks mentioned Sommers. Like, oh, come to think about it, you know, Sommers did say something about trying to pick me back up. And then Scopper's like, oh, Sommers, huh? That reminds me of an old tale from the past. And it's like, okay, there we have it. Now we know that Scopper and Sommers did meet before, because that was a big question coming off of last chapter. You know, Scopper is an odd character in my opinion, because coming into this flashback, Scopper was like, oh, guys, me and Shanks arrived late. We didn't have the full picture. And now that we have this flashback, it's like, wait, Scopper, you did have the full picture. You know what's going on, more so than Loki. What do you mean, brother? I get that he wasn't here from the very start, but putting the pieces together shouldn't be that crazy in my opinion. And then, last chapter, Shanks was explaining immortality, the Abyss Circle, the Great One Emu, and the God Knights. And Scopper was like, oh, what a weird power. And then this week, Scopper's like, oh, by the way, Shanks, we beat the God Knights pretty often. Like, dude, Scopper, you know everything, brother. You know everything, man. Stop feigning it, man. So, yeah, pretty good stuff here. I do like that he does pay the God Knights some sort of compliment, if you want to call it that. He says, yeah, you know, it's surprising to think that the Celestial Dragons have a fighting force. I thought that they were all trash. And it's like, okay, even though the God Knights caught major L's in this chapter, major strays, I would even say, at least Scopper didn't call them trash. We gotta win in the book, boys. We gotta win in the book. So Shanks backs up why it's so surprising to think that the world government has a fighting force. And he says, yeah, that's because they don't really come down from their perch. They really do see themselves as gods. It would have been really awful to live my life up there with them. And Scopper says, yep, that is what you call fate, my dear boy. Then we cut back over to King Harald because they're fighting King Harald while they're having this whole conversation. And Shanks is like, man, I really want to save Harald, Gaban. And Gaban says, well, it was you who taught me that saving these guys is kind of impossible. All we can do now is wait for Loki to show up. So that is when we cut back over to Loki and we see that him and the hammer, they're kind of huffing and puffing. They're like, whoo, you know, it's kind of draining their energy. This isn't exactly an easy battle on either side. Loki's like, okay, you gotta get out of the way. What are you, the treasure's guardian? You're just the hammer. What the heck is going on? He coats his own hammer in Conqueror's Hockey, or just Black Lightning in general, and then he slams it against Ragnir. His hammer ends up breaking, and when he thought all was lost, he looks over, and Ragnir, while not broken, is wounded. And Ragnir has taken on a new form. It is a squirrel? Yeah, that's right. Ragnir's true form is that of a squirrel. So what's going on here? We don't get a devil fruit moniker in this chapter, but I think it is kind of safe to assume that it is a devil fruit that got consumed by a hammer. I think, I'm not too sure, right? With things like this, it's all up in the air. It's kind of like Shamrock's Cerberus Blade or the Gorosei in their yokai transformations. What's really going on here? And it's tough because Ragnir possibly existed during the Void Century. So when you go even farther back in time, it's like, yeah, anything's really possible. This could be magic. This could just be a hammer squirrel, or it could be a mythological devil fruit. We don't know. Hell, this could even just be a regular zoan. So in the community right now, a lot of people are saying that this could be the Norse mythological creature known as Rotoskr. If I'm mispronouncing it, forgive me. But yes, we do have a mythological squirrel in Norse mythology that runs up and down the Yggdrasil tree, delivering hateful and bashful messages between the eagle that lives on top and Nidhogg that lives down below. I don't know if that's what Oda's going for. You know, anything is kind of possible. When I look at Ragnir's squirrel form, it doesn't exactly scream mythological creature, you know what I mean? Like, this really could just be a normal squirrel. We don't know yet. And another thing to keep in mind as well is Ragnir's lightning powers that it has current day and at the end of this chapter, they're not present during the battle between Ragnir and Loki. So what's going on there? Was Ragnir the squirrel holding back? Or does Ragnir just not have lightning powers? And that's something that Loki's Zoan Devil Fruit actually gives to Ragnir. That is a question we do have to raise coming off of this chapter. So yes, as far as Rotoskr goes, even in mythological forums from what I've seen, there's no statements of it having lightning powers. Hell, there's no powers stated in general. It really is just a squirrel in Norse mythology that runs up and down a tree. So I don't know what Oda's doing with this one. And also, one route we do have to keep in mind is that Oda could very easily say that this squirrel hammer is something unique to the One Piece world. Kind of like Sun God Nika, right? He could simply say, oh yeah, this squirrel, it's this creature from the Void Century, and it has this power. That could happen, right? I'm not saying that's the case. I'm just saying we gotta leave the door open until we get some sort of confirmation or just more context on this squirrel in general. But overall, I think it's really cute. You know, I do think that Ragnir is straight up adorable. I love the goofiness of this design. And now I'm just kind of wondering, but why hasn't this squirrel made an appearance current day? I get it, right? When Loki was chained up to the tree, yeah, Sea Stone was touching this thing. If it's a Zoan Devil Fruit, yeah, it can't come out and say hello. But now that Loki's unchained, now that Ragnir is freed, why hasn't the squirrel said hello to Chopper, Luffy, Zoro, Hyrutin, Gerd, Goldberg, Stanson, Roto? Like, it makes you wonder, right? Like, is it shy? Like, maybe it doesn't want to come out in this form that often. Maybe Loki controls it and he says, hey, you stay as a hammer. I don't like your squirrel form. I'm not really too sure. But either way, I would just love to see the squirrel interact with other characters. And sad to say, though, but it doesn't look like it can actually talk. It can only do the kurururudu, gee quee sound effects, which kind of cute. So that's why I kind of do want to talk to Chopper, because Chopper would genuinely be able to understand this thing. It's like my complaints, well, not complaints, but my thing with Chopper and the owl in the owl library. It's like, Chopper, that owl has been up there for hundreds of years. Talk to him. Chopper doesn't talk to the owl. Chopper, there's a mythological squirrel here, possibly. Can you talk to him? He's possibly from the Void Century and he knows about this fruit. Will Chopper talk to him? I hope so. Fingers crossed, brother. And as far as what we could get out of a conversation between this squirrel and Chopper, hell, the squirrel could tell Chopper who put it on the mission to guard Ragnir in the first place. Was it Joy Boy? Was it a giant from the Void Century? There's so much we could learn from this interaction. So yes, I would love to see the squirrel and Chopper interact, or hell, maybe even the squirrel and the owl in the owl library could interact, and they could share some Void Century banter together. I do think the possibilities are endless, and I cannot wait until we, the Straw Hats, stop and smell the roses after they beat Emu off the island. So, funny enough, a couple days ago, I made a video talking about Usopp and how he might be able to wield Ragnir. And I made that video well before we had any spoilers for this chapter. So I was kind of like, putting my chips on the board and not really knowing how it would pan out come a week later. Now that we know that Ragnir is a squirrel hammer hybrid, I actually feel pretty good about that theory now. And I know, people do not like hearing about Usopp talk in the big 2026. That's just how it is. And I don't blame people for not liking Usopp. I don't even like Usopp. But it's just that the theory of Usopp wielding a mythological Legendary Elbaph hammer, that has been around for years. It really has. This isn't like a brand new theory that's coming out today. No. Usopp wielding a lightning hammer has been a tale and theory as old as time itself, brother. So now that we have Ragnir here as this squirrel thing, I do think that theory is gaining some weight to it. I know this might sound odd at first, but the fact that Ragnir is a squirrel might actually work in Usopp's favor. Because one of the big lies that Usopp told back during Dressrosa was that he was a descendant of Mont Blanc Noland. Of course, we know that that's most likely false, unless we whip out a family tree and that's somehow true. It's false, right? But the Tontatas, who are very gullible, looked at Usopp, they saw his stupid head shape, and they said, oh my god, Usopp has a nut for a head. He's gotta be a Mont Blanc descendant. And remember back to the Mont Blanc family, one of their main characteristics is the nut head. They have chestnuts for hair. So I look at this squirrel, and I'm like, yo, this squirrel would love the Mont Blanc family, right? I mean, squirrels love nuts. They love all kinds of nuts. So if Usopp were to flex this weird lineage or just put on a helmet that looks like a nut, there is a non-zero chance that he could potentially tame this squirrel creature. One thing I've been seeing people saying is, oh, but Sai, why would he pick up a hammer? Why would he use a hammer? It doesn't fit his fighting style. Brother, it does though. That is the thing. Usopp, throughout the entire story, has used hammers. Look at Chu, one of his very first fights. Used a hammer. Look at Perona, used a hammer. Mr. Four used 2 different hammers. Look at Strong World, Usopp used a hammer. Treble and Sugar used a hammer. Usopp is kind of just the hammer guy. And then of course, aside from fighting, he always used a small little hammer mallet to fix the going merry, but that's not really, fighting style, whatever. But yeah, Usopp and his compatibility with hammers in general, I think is just very high. And there is this running gag where all of Usopp's hammers get bigger and bigger, right? He started with a 5-ton hammer, he went to a 10-ton hammer, then he went to a 100-ton hammer. Him getting a hammer that nobody else can pick up, this hammer that should be damn near like a bajillion pounds, it kind of falls in line with Usopp, brother. What can I say? Like I said, I'm not the biggest Usopp fan out there. He's my least favorite Straw Hat, but at least I can acknowledge the theory. You know what I mean? So Usopp wielding Ragnir coming off of this chapter, I do think is looking pretty decent. And even if he can't lift the hammer by itself, maybe he simply puts the squirrel into a slingshot and he shoots it off. There's a lot of ways to make this work. So yes, Ragnir being this zoan -- potentially mythological creature, I think is pretty damn awesome. I do like the surprise factor of it being a squirrel. I wonder what color the squirrel is. Because while I'm imagining brown, I could very easily see this thing being green or purple. Is that crazy? Also, one more point to add on to Usopp potentially wielding Ragnir in the future, but there's actually a color spread where Usopp is seen sleeping with a squirrel. That kind of does look like Ragnir, but then again, there's not a lot of ways to draw a squirrel. So yeah, I do want to bring this to your guys' attention, but at the same time, keep in mind that there's essentially a color spread for everything, so this could mean something, but this could also just be a crazy coincidence. But as a believer in the Usopp Ragnir theory, I do look at this and I smile a little bit. So King Harald takes his sword and he swings it super hard, knocking everybody in the room out. And Shanks says, oh man, what do we do to end this fight? And Scopper says, he's using Conqueror's Hockey. This is a first for me. And it's like, wait, what? You know, I made sure to check like another translation to see if that was correct. And apparently it is. Has Scopper not fought another Conqueror's Hockey user before? I'm just holding out for more translations. I feel like that one's a little bit odd. Like, I'll wait for TCB, I'll wait for Viz. Because there's no way this is Scopper's first opponent with Conqueror's Hockey, right? Right? Pirate King's crew. I mean, I feel like Roger was fighting against so many big names in the past. Surely one of them had to have had a Conqueror's Hockey opponent for Scopper, but maybe not. So yeah, I do want to hold back my judgments on that line until I get some more sources out there. But we see that Jarl keeps on screaming out for the soldiers to stall King Harald. Do not let him eat the devil fruit. King Harald has sticks sticking out of him, sword wounds, everything, you name it, but he is still standing because he is immortal. We cut over to Loki, and it looks like the soldiers did end up buying enough time for him because the squirrel has now acknowledged Loki and has opened the treasure chest for him. Loki puts the fruit in the palm of his hand because the fruit is human-sized, which I tried to zoom in to see what kind of fruit that is. It's impossible to tell. It's just way too small. Like, it literally looks like scribblings on a piece of paper. But Loki does end up devouring it. And this is pretty crazy, brother, because coming off of last chapter, I was skeptical on this devil fruit actually existing. Because I was like, oh, like, what are the chances that Ragnir has a devil fruit and Elbaph has one, and it's in the same room? Turns out the chances are pretty high. We did get the coolest scenario possible, where Loki is what I would call double black. He has a zoan hammer, and he has a zoan form himself. It is phenomenal. So, he eats the fruit, and that is when we get his brand new transformation. Unfortunately, Oda does not show it to us. He doesn't. Nope. Oda somehow manages to silhouette this creature for multiple panels. Bro, what? Yes, we see that his hands start turning into claws, his hair starts getting really spiky, or he's just getting fins, and then we see the eyes and the scream. He says, bow, which is very odd. What monster goes bow? Again, one thing we have to keep in mind is that this is the world of One Piece. We've heard weird noises come out of people sometimes, so bow could be a very threatening roar coming from a very silly monster, or vice versa. So we see that the squirrel is actually very happy that Loki has eaten the fruit. He's happy to see this form again, and that makes sense. We don't know what the relationship is between Ragnir and the legendary Elbaph Devil Fruit, but I like to imagine during the Void Century they knew each other. So yeah, maybe the squirrel is like reminiscing when he sees Loki. So when it comes to Loki though, this appearance is just odd. Like, I don't know if there's a better way to describe it. Like, between the hands, the hair, the eyes, the shape, and even like the really stubby legs. Like, look at the panel after the squirrel starts cheering it on. You see stubs, brother. It's like, what? What is this thing? It feels like a joke, but not a joke at the same time. King Harald says, okay, Loki, you've eaten it, because he hears the roars in the background, and he's like, let's see this legendary power. Funny enough, Harald sees it, but we don't. You know, Oda decides to silhouette the battle. He only shows us the shadows, and in that next silhouette we get of Loki, it looks even odder. What is happening here? It looks like Loki has like a really skinny head. You see his horns, you see his goatee, and then his body like arches back like it's a horse. And then it has like this long hand hoof thing. And it also has like a hand over here that looks like a claw. Brother, I'm so confused. So online, I've seen a myriad of theories as to what Loki could actually be. And they all stem more or less from Norse mythology. Nidhogg, the lightning dragon, like what we saw here in Elbaph. People are saying Fenrir. People are saying Jormungandr. There's a lot of options out there. And with Loki's silhouette, it could be any one of them, possibly. But where I get hung up at is that Oda just introduced us to those monsters this arc. Of course, they were Killingham's Nightmare Kid versions of them, but we still saw them, right? Saul was fighting Fenrir. You know, President Kiba was fighting Jormungandr. And then we even had Nidhogg fighting the Giants of Elbaph. And it's like, okay, would Oda really show us those ideas back then if he was simply going to bring one of those back into Loki's real form later? I don't think so. Of course, it is possible. You could just say that, oh, that was a kid's imagination, and the real thing is much more terrifying and stronger. Sure, that could work. We've seen Oda reuse ideas before, like the Cerberus from Thriller Bark. Of course, people argue, oh, it's a chimera, but they did call it a Cerberus, and that was like a big, you know, goofy plot point. We're like, oh, it's a Cerberus, but it's a chimera. I don't know. And then the dog got really sad. We had a Cerberus there, and then, lo and behold, here in Elbaph, Oda brought it back as Shamrock's sword. So it's like, yeah, like, Oda isn't shy when it comes to reusing these ideas and just making them cooler. So Loki being Jormungandr, Nidhogg, Fenrir, it doesn't look bad, but this is the same arc. I don't know. The first thought that popped into my head when I saw this silhouette was simply Sleipnir, which is Odin's horse. And I was like, yeah, like, Loki's silhouette does look like a horse, but then I remember just like Nidhogg, Jormungandr, and Fenrir, we saw Sleipnir in this flashback. It was the 8-legged horse that Estrid brought to the castle. So because of that, I don't think it's going to be Sleipnir either. So now, with all that being said, there is one Norse mythological creature that I do think Loki could be, and that's simply because all of the other popular ones, like I mentioned, have already been taken. But I think Loki could actually be Fafnir, which is this Norse dragon serpent monster that killed his father and hoarded the accursed gold of the family. Of course, there's many iterations to this mythology, and if you stop for a second and said, huh, that sounds familiar, that's because that is what Smaug from The Hobbit is actually based off of. But yes, I think Fafnir could be an interesting route just because of the dragon angle. And one thing too is Ragnir. Ragnir's relationship to Loki and this devil fruit, it seems like it's in love, right? When the squirrel is up dancing, you see like heart emojis coming out of him. And it's like, huh, like how funny would it be if the name for Ragnir was a giveaway as to what the devil fruit is? Ragnir and Fafnir, maybe they were a duo, and that's why Ragnir really likes it. I think that would be kind of cute. It would make sense in that way too. So yeah, I do lean towards Fafnir. I think that's my unique pick. Outside of Fafnir, I do like the idea that it is just something brand new to the One Piece universe like Sun God Nika. That is always a possibility. And one thing we can definitely look back at is the Elbaph mural for reference. Because we could say, if Loki is Fafnir, for example, it is that giant dragon above the Yggdrasil Atom tree. Or, if it's something unique to the One Piece verse, we could look at the right side of the mural and say Loki is simply the Karmic Serpent. And one reason to believe the Karmic Serpent route is because of the ancient giant on the left. A lot of people looked at his armament and those X's he has on him, and they're like, wait a minute, that looks akin to the serpent on the right side of the mural. So perhaps that is a hint that Loki is the Karmic Serpent of Destruction. I do not think that would be that bad. So when it comes to all this, I do lean towards Fafnir or the Hellfire Serpent for Loki's Devil Fruit, but I will admit, I do like the Nidhogg route a lot, simply because we have to explain Loki's lightning power somehow, and when Nidhogg was introduced here in Elbaph, it was described as a lightning dragon. And not just that, but going over to the Squirrel Hammer Ragnir, if that is supposed to be a play on Rataskr, then this could all make sense, because in mythology, Rataskr is tasked with going up and down the Yggdrasil tree, delivering messages between an eagle and Nidhogg. So this could be the connection Oda's going for. But like I said, I still lean towards Fafnir or the Hellfire Serpent for the Loki Devil Fruit, but I just want to acknowledge that I do like some of these other theories though. And of course, if this isn't the first video of mine you've watched, you know that I like to keep the door open to other possibilities. I am not correct all the time. Hell, I'm barely correct 50% of the time, and that's the beauty of it. We're all here to discuss a myriad of theories, so if you guys have your own options or routes down below, please let me know. I would be very interested in hearing about them. But of course, just a heads up, we will be throwing up a lot of polls regarding Loki in the next couple of days, so if you're still cooking up your theories and it's not ready yet, feel free to take your time, brothers. So So, after Loki lays down the beatdown on King Harald, we see that he does come back to his senses for a little bit. He says, as expected, Loki, you have the blood of a conqueror within you, because he sees the conqueror's hockey and the hammer. And that is when Loki's like, wait, Dad, you're back. If you come back to your senses, then Harald cuts him off saying, hey, Loki, this is just for a second. And look around you. What I've done here is way too absurd for me to be forgiven. Loki says, but you were just being controlled, father. And he says, no. It's not that simple. My thoughts were being manipulated. I was beginning to think of myself as a god. You could lead Elbaph with honor, together with your elder brother. Let's go! Sorry. Hey, I'm here for the Hyrden hype, dude. I was afraid that we would get no mention of Hyrden whatsoever, but he does right here. Hey, Loki, you and your brother rule Elbaph. Dude, what happens to that? What happens to that? So Loki says, you're the worst, you know that, right? Making your own son end your life. Not even the worst parents would make their child do something like this. That is when King Harald says, by the way, Loki, I forgot to mention one thing. Thank you for destroying Brewer's village. Thank you for the incident about Ida. It won't bring her back, but I really appreciate your feelings. And it's like, okay. He knew the reason why Loki did it, man. But he still threw him in jail, which, you know, actions have consequences, sure. But I just thought that was really wholesome, dude. They're just bonding in their final moments. And that is when King Harald says, hey, hurry up, Loki. The Dominion is coming back. Emu's taking control again. Loki says, I'm gonna hold a grudge against you for this, you bastard. And Harald's response to this is to simply say, me too. I love you, son. And it hits, man. I mean, that's the thing, right? This dialogue doesn't make direct sense, but Loki saying that he's going to do this and that he's going to hold a grudge, it's his way of saying I love you. So Harald simply responded in kind, but more directly. And that is why the chapter title is titled Opposite. Because even though Loki's saying this, he means the opposite, right? And I just think that's beautiful, brother. We see that final blow. Loki shatters King Harald with Ragnir, with Conqueror's hockey. And Harald's done. Loki starts crying, and Harald says, my son, all that matters now is the future of Elbaph. And now I'm just wondering, but where do we go from here? Last chapter, the hot theory was that Loki doesn't want to become king of Elbaph. Loki doesn't want to besmirch his father's name, so he doesn't take the throne, and he doesn't tell people what happened here. Off of this chapter, though, I'm not too sure. Like, Shanks and Gaban, they see everything that's going down. You know, Jarl is still awake as we speak somehow. So do they all just sit around the campfire and say, hey, let's not tell anybody about this? Because if so, that's kind of crazy. Especially when Harald, in his final moments, just wants what's best for Elbaph. And even though Loki leaving Elbaph would save his father's name, it doesn't progress Elbaph whatsoever. So I'm not too sure what happens next chapter. I feel like that's going to be a very heavy conversation. And I'm looking forward to it. You know, I wouldn't be shocked if they still go down that route. You know, even though it's not what's best for Elbaph, it's just better for King Harald's legacy. Like, oh yeah, like, what's 15 years without a king, guys? Let's just leave, you know? And one thing we do have to ask now is how the hell did Shanks beat Loki later? I know. We're not here to really power scale, but you gotta be honest with yourselves. That's a crazy accomplishment. Because Shanks in this chapter was not able to beat King Harald, even with Skapra Gaban and the castle guards. Of course, Shanks, this isn't his peak of power. Shanks will only get stronger from here on out. But still, Loki's the same way. Like, this chapter is day one Devil Fruit Loki. 8 years from now, when Shanks fights Loki, I'm assuming Loki has mastered his fruit. It took Luffy 2 years to master the Gumu Gumu no Mi and awaken it into the Sun God Nika fruit. I wouldn't be shocked if Loki is awakened present day. If that's the case, how does Shanks beat him? And he has Ragnir! Dude, that's crazy. Yeah. Something is going on with that one. People are saying that Shanks snuck Loki. Maybe they worked out a deal. Maybe all of Shanks' crew jumped Loki. There's a lot of ways to make it work, but now I'm just like, okay, I want to see that brawl. I want to see that interaction, dude. What really went down that day? Was there even a fight? I gotta see it, man. But yes, that is it for the chapter. It is some great stuff, man. I cannot wait to spend a whole week speculating as far as what Devil Fruit Loki actually has. Like I said, I am on board the Fafnir or just One Piece original route, but I do like those other theories. Just my main holdup is just would Oda introduce those creatures as nightmare monsters only to bring it back 20 chapters later as Loki's legendary Devil Fruit? I'm not too sure. That is where I'm just like, you know, woo, ah, ooh. Let me know all your thoughts down below, guys. We will be back in the next couple of days to read through the comment section, so make sure to drop your theories, opinions, and etc. down below. And if you have the time, I always gotta plug myself, but if you have the time, please check out my side channels right over here. I have Psyduck, SYVDUCK, where I do gaming videos, horror gameplay stuff, and just a lot of random reactions in general. And then I have Somnus Reacts down here, where I react to anime, most notably One Punch Man, One Piece, and soon to be free-written JJK, so make sure to check those out if you have the time. But yeah, that is it for this video. Stay safe, guys. Peace out. Hope you had a Merry Christmas and Happy New Year's.